who could tell me the country that Lake Tana is in.
In Mrs. Tilscher's class, you could travel up the Blue Nile with your finger.
Ethiopia, that's right, Ethiopia. So the first country that...
Tracing the route while Mrs. Tilscher chanted the scenery.
So as it leaves Ethiopia, it goes through another country. What's the name of that next country, please?
Tana, Ethiopia, Khartoum, Aswan.
Aswan Dam, that's right. So I've written that down for you, and you need to make sure that that's on your map as well.
That for an hour. Then a skittle of milk and the chalky pyramids rubbed into dust. A window opened with a long pole. The laugh of a bell swung by a running child. This was better than home. Enthralling books. The classroom glowed like a sweet shop. Sugar paper, coloured shapes. Brady and Hindley faded like the faint, uneasy smudge of a mistake. Mrs. Tilscher loved you. Some mornings you found she'd left a gold star by your name. The scent of a pencil, slowly, carefully shaved. A xylophone's nonsense heard from another form. Over the Easter term, the inky tadpoles changed from commas into exclamation marks. Three frogs hopped in the playground, freed by a dunce, followed by a line of kids jumping and croaking away from the lunch queue. A rough boy told you how you were born. You kicked him, but stared at your parents, appalled when you got back home.
6/11s.
That feverish July, the air tasted of electricity. A tangible alarm made you always untidy, hot, fractious under the heavy, sexy sky.
Please, miss, where do babies come from?
Not now, dear. We're in the middle of our sums.
Mrs. Tilscher smiled, then turned away.
12/11s.
Reports were handed out. You ran through the gates, impatient to be grown, as the sky split open into a thunderstorm.
This poem's about growing up. It's about losing innocence, moving from a sort of safe, womb-like, loving world of early childhood into one where you realise there is evil, there is sex, there is otherness and things outside your control.
I think it's so appropriate that the first line of this poem is, you could travel up the Blue Nile, because this is really a poem about a journey that every child makes from childhood into those first years of adolescence, when you're passing from 10, 11 towards 12 and 13, when the world suddenly becomes strange, and the world that you have known as a child is kind of rocked by all of the changes happening in your body and the changes in the world around you.
There's a great line in the third verse about the inky tadpoles changing from commas into exclamation marks, and that suggests perhaps the sort of surprise and joy of growing up, but also an exclamation mark might follow a scream or something, so it suggests sort of shock and alarm.
The tadpoles are changing, the frogs are unleashed into the playground, and all of this is indicative, of course, of the changes that are happening in the speaker of the poem. A rough boy told you how you were born. So this is the dawn of sexuality and awareness. And then there's this beautiful response, which is so true. You kicked him, but stared at your parents, appalled, which is also very funny. But you really get a sense of how terrible this sudden sort of awakening into this new world is.
A real crux comes in the second verse, where we get coloured shapes, Brady and Hindley, and there's this shift to these two very real adults who were the Moors murderers and killed several children in the 1960s and were brought to trial in 1966. So it sets this poem in a very precise historical context.
If, as a reader, you have a knowledge of that context, it does give you that extra kind of depth charge of darkness. And I suppose you sense that, as the speaker says, faded like the faint, uneasy smudge of a mistake. It's something that the speaker of the poem actually wants to keep on the edges and wants to keep at bay. So a bit like the sexuality that's also being addressed in the poem. It's something that the speaker is aware of, but almost doesn't really want to approach and wants to kind of stay within the safe confines of childhood instead.
That feverish July, the air tasted of electricity. A tangible alarm made you always untidy, hot, fractious under the heavy, sexy sky. You ran through the gates impatient to be grown, as the sky split open into a thunderstorm.